Hello everybody, I'm Deaglan DiMurro, and once again, I would like to thank each and every one of you. We uploaded the first episode of the Political Inaccuracy Podcast less than a week ago, and it's already received a ton of support. We would like to thank all of you who watched the episode and who gave us feedback. We are working to implement as much as we can from what we've heard from all of you. We have received a lot of great input and a few wonderful comments, and we encourage all of you to continue with that. Unfortunately, none of the feedback is mentioned in this particular episode, as it was recorded before last Wednesday, and the same is true with the next episode, Episode 3. Despite this, we ask that all of you join us in our inquiries and continue to support the show as wonderful as you have already been doing. We cannot stress enough how much we love to read your comments and feedback, so please keep sending them. Our upload schedule will most likely become every Sunday. I also have another project, coinciding with Political Inaccuracy, that will be uploaded to this channel on Fridays. Lastly, we would like to extend an offer to anyone who would like to work with us. We are truly interested in anything you can bring to the table. We would also like to hear from all of you to know if anyone would be interested in joining us on an episode in the future. Also be sure to follow our Instagram at political_inaccuracy to stay up to date with what's going on with the podcast, and in order to give us input and gain opportunities to work with us. Before I turn you to this episode, I would like to pose a question that we will address in episode 4. We progress towards this question in the next 2 episodes, being, if you were to be in command of a mission to colonize a planet abroad, whether leading the team or being in command from Earth, what would you do first? Upon arrival at your destination, what would be your first course of action? How do you establish a stable community? We would love to hear your answers, input, or anything else you have to say on the matter down in the comments below. Now, without further ado.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second episode of the Political Inaccuracy Podcast, where I, Jimmy Sullivan, alongside Deaglan DiMurro and Connor DiGiacomo, will tackle some political inquiries along with our own theoretical input on significant issues. Today we are going to get into some minor issues such as the future of the United States, as well as the future of space travel and the future of life beyond this earth. But first, we have a new addition from our first episode. Connor DiGiacomo, this is your first episode with us. It's our second episode, but this is your first. So.
Welcome to the club. Welcome to the club.
Thanks.
Yeah. He's like a cool kid now. He needs
I'm so honored. I have
One of us.
I have the improvement of Deaglan DiMurro.
You
strive for this.
Yeah. Other than like our approval, do you want to like tell us a little bit about yourself, or?
Yeah. So basically, I've always been intrigued by politics and what's going on in the world. And I actually had met Jimmy in the summer of my 8th grade at a sports broadcasting camp. Wow, that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
But so basically, yeah, I just kept my relationship with Jimmy and then met Deaglan.
I just
Last
kind of
year
just
when-
popped into the equation.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Met
where.
Deaglan,
More like he forced his way in.
Yeah.
kind of. And
Basically, yeah.
met Deaglan his freshman year here at our school. And I don't know. I never realized that Jimmy was so involved with politics. I knew Deaglan was, and I just figured that
Yeah, I
I had
can't
to
shut
come
up.
along. I had to come along and join him, so this should be great.
Yeah, no, I remember meeting Connor, and we actually, I remember we had a camp-wide debate where you would get like 2 issues, and you'd have like 2 minutes each to defend them, and I remember you winning. I remember thinking, oh, who is this kid? I gotta meet this kid. And so I met him, and then he actually, he came back, I saw him a few months later, and I was looking at him for a while. I was like, he looks familiar. He looks familiar. He looks familiar. And then I go, oh, yeah, that's him. That's right. And I think you saw my Mets watch or something, and you were like,
Yes.
boo, Mets. And I was like,
I know who you are. You're,
Yeah.
you're the little jerk from camp. Yeah,
You're
I know
that
exactly.
one.
I am that one. All right, so I think that's a good segue into our first topic. Let's kind of discuss this We'll take it in whatever direction you guys want. But
Where are we going, man?
Where are we going? That's a good question.
Where are we going?
Where are we going, and are we there yet? But
let's hope we're not there yet.
This is a pretty big time for the United States. Obviously, Donald Trump is our president. He's been our president for a little over a month now. Just recently gave his joint address to Congress. But this is a pretty big time for the United States. He both, with domestic policy and policy abroad, whatever you think of the new administration or not. So I guess, Connor, since you're the new guy, I'll start with you. What do you think is maybe the future, maybe not necessarily in the long term, but in the next couple years for, our country and where we're going,
I'll just throw this in, too.
Yeah,
not
throw
so
this
much,
in.
Not so much. Not even so much where you think we're going, because there could be a million answers. Where do you want to see us?
Yeah,
go?
that's a better.
Wow, this is a great question. Where do I want to see the United States of America going?
So should we say we agree upon for now just by 2020?
By
so
20,
by the
4
next
years.
2020.
By
Okay.
2020, yeah.
by the next election.
There needs
what do you
to
wanna
be a
see?
change in the spirit of this country. I think that's the most important issue that needs to go on. As you see these documents of the later 20th century and the morale of this country, we need to return to morale in which we're all unified, regardless of party. And although Donald Trump may seem as like the most divisive man in America, I want to see, first and foremost, a unification on economic, foreign affairs, all different kinds of issues within the United States. I think that is what we need to do first. And that was basically his whole campaign. If you really looked into it, that's basically what he was preaching.
Right, and the way that you say changing the spirit of the people in this country, I think we had talked about this before. But if you've seen Ronald Reagan's farewell address to the country, I think we did have this conversation before. The way he talks about it is he basically says to the people, he says basically to the parents, let your children know what it means to be an American. Tell them the stories of those men on D-Day who went up the beaches in Normandy. Tell them about the soldiers who stormed Okinawa and Iwo Jima. Tell them those stories, and really let them know this is what it means to be an American,
Right.
and make sure they have that sense of pride in them. And I think that's something that we've lost. And I'll admit, I fall to the side of things where a lot of times I'm not going to be the first one to trust the government. In fact, I will often be the last one to trust the government. But even so, you still need a sense of pride about you, even if you don't love our government, even if you don't love where the country is. I mean, you have full right to protest, and I have nothing against protesting. I think protesting is great. But I think to a certain degree, you need to have pride in your country too.
Right.
Because if you don't have pride in your country, then what good are you going to do for it? As John Kennedy says, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country.
Exactly.
What good
Right,
can
right.
you do for your country if you have no pride in it?
And pivoting from what you just said about John F. Kennedy and one of his most famous quotes is the principles of Reaganomics. If we go back to Reagan's years in office, is the idea that in order to combat inflation, there needed to be this sense in a greater America. So a lot of people had to lose their jobs. A lot of people, were losing income. But there was this idea that there was a greater tomorrow in which we had to achieve as a whole. And I think that's the first issue that Donald Trump has to attack.
I think we've definitely lost that sense of things over the past. I mean, basically, with everybody since Reagan.
Yeah, and I think another important thing is, too, where we want to go, and this is a much more fundamental thing, like, we need to be able to do the stuff like we're doing right now. We need to be able to debate each other on stuff and not, want to kill each other. You know what I'm saying?
Oh,
like,
absolutely.
We need to be able to not agree on things, because
Well,
nobody's going to agree
So
on everything.
you and me talked about this last week, Jimmy, how important it is just for people to get out there and just start conversations.
Yes.
Even with people who you don't think will give a damn about politics or
Yes.
something like that. Just start a conversation with them, and they will oftentimes surprise you.
Yeah, and that's the thing, too, because we need to be able to have these civilized discussions. And the thing is, too, we need to have a respect and a tolerance for each other that, in our system we don't necessarily have now. Like, we have to
Absolutely.
have pride in America, but we also need to love Americans. And I think that's very important as we look towards the future. And I mean, not just for 2020, but that's for all time, I think, really.
I mean, exactly as Connor had brought up before, where he talked about, before it was, I mean, we've had the parties for, as far back basically as this country goes. I mean, just after Washington.
Right.
But there was a time like back when Reagan was around when, I mean, the parties respected each other.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, sure, you had things like Watergate, whatnot. They still were competitors.
Yes.
Absolutely. But they respected one another.
Yeah.
At this point,
There's
it's
just a sense of sliminess within our current government, and the hatred that they have for each other. It doesn't bode well. You're supposed to be representing the views and the hopes of America, and all you're doing is creating a bigger chasm. I mean, you're not helping anything.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is, like, you were talking about parties respecting each other. Like, just go back to, like, 2000. 2000's a contested election, kind of like this one,
Right.
where, one person wins a popular vote, one person wins electorally. It's very controversial. It goes to the Supreme Court. And the other party, particularly Al Gore, was good enough to concede that and say, this is America, we need to support the president.
He decides, you know what, look, it's fine. You don't need to do a recount. I'm not asking for a recount. It is what it is.
And what I think I'm saying is we need more Al Gores. I mean, we need more people like that who respect the other side.
Not more people who have claimed to invent the internet.
Well, yeah.
Not more of that. No, we don't need any more of that.
No, yeah.
but more people who can respect the opposite.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And what he did really, I think, fostered respect that allowed President Bush to go ahead with what he wanted to do and allowed Republicans and Democrats to respect each other. Where now, I mean,
right,
they don't even view the other side as legitimate. Some of them.
Oh yeah.
I mean, honestly. So I think that's where we need to go, where we need to really just have respect. I mean, it's sad that that's really what I want, but it kind of is. It's a really important thing that we need to understand each other's differences and try to work around them.
Right, and I'll say this. Hope of mine. I don't really know that this is going to be the next 4 years. It might be a little crazy of me to say this for next 4 years, but we're talking about respect, amongst each other's parties. But also, like, within your own party, too. I mean, people, you're talking about people saying that the other party is delegitimate. You have people within their own party claiming that members of their own party are delegitimate.
Yeah.
And honestly, a hope of mine out of this is there's so much tension. Like, there are some Democrats who like some Republicans more than they like their fellow Democrats.
Yes.
And there are some Republicans who much prefer some Democrats over some of their fellow Republicans. What I'm hoping is this can lead just people to realize that this whole idea of two parties is dumb. I mean, either we need to open it up to a lot more parties, and I'll be the first to say it. I'm a fan of third parties. I think they should be more prevalent. Well, yeah, you yourself, you're a libertarian, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of you look at it from a third party perspective, and they just don't have the resources right now to compete because they're just getting killed by super PACs. I mean, we could talk about campaign finance reform till we're blue in the face. I mean, I'm happy to do that for, hours and hours on end.
So that's hopefully another thing we can have fixed.
Yeah.
There's that. On the Democratic side of things, when we're talking like the primaries, Bernie Sanders helped to get the number of super delegates down.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, that's a big deal. If you're a Democrat and you want to talk about a fair electing process, there's that.
Yeah.
And so then,
I mean,
campaign finances.
You look at the conflict of interest between Bill Clinton's, influence on the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton running as president. I mean that's a pretty easy example to point to, but just the disadvantages that people like Gary Johnson and particularly Bernie Sanders were put in. I mean, Bernie Sanders had a real shot to be the president of the United States. I mean, it may not seem like that now, but you look at what went on at the DNC and things like that. Although I'm a Republican, it would have been nice to see someone like that rise up and gain so much support from the people of this nation. And unfortunately, in our current system, that just can't happen.
Just kind of got to cheat it out.
Yeah. And I mean, I looked at a number two when you were talking about Gary Johnson, how he was doing in the polls at the time of the debates. Basically, if anybody doesn't know, you have to get 5% in the polls to get into the debates. He was actually polling better than Ross Perot was in 1992 at the time, at each respective time. Now, Ross Perot obviously dropped out and came back and did that whole thing.
Yeah.
Where if he didn't drop out, he might have actually won that election, crazy as that sounds. But Gary Johnson was actually polling better than Ross Perot, and so I think the standards for, like, debates and stuff like that and public exposure are just too high, where third-party candidates, they're never going to, I mean, this is a year where you had two historically unpopular candidates, and they still couldn't break through.
It's such a paradox because there are so many people. Again, I think I mentioned this last week with you about some person who, after coming out of the polls, said, "Who is this Jerry? Who is this Gary Johnson guy? Man, if I knew who you were, maybe I would have voted for you." Right? But the issue is, they're not on the debates, and for most people, that's all. If they watch anything, it's the debates.
Yes.
Right? And so, they're not on the debates. How are you ever going to find out who they are? How,
Right, and they generally
And so they're never going to get more support, and it's just a paradox. You're never going to hit that 5% if there's no way for people to get to know who you are.
I mean, you look at what states they represent, too. I mean, they represent some smaller, in terms of population, some smaller states, and what they've done in those states, in the case of Gary Johnson, I mean, he's made some great strides in New Mexico, but unfortunately, it's New Mexico, so nobody's looking at New Mexico as the political hub of the United States.
And same thing then with Sanders in Vermont, too, Vermont, who thinks about Vermont when they think about the United States? I mean, I'm sorry, Vermont, but people think about the United States, they think Texas, California, New York, D.C., Pennsylvania, stuff
Florida,
like that.
Yeah,
Florida. But then you do, and a lot of times third-party candidates are going to come out of spots like that because if you're in like a major political hub, if you're in New York or if you're in California, it's kind of hard to not come out Democratic.
Yeah.
If you're in Texas, if you're in the likes of like Alabama or something like that, it's hard to not come out Republican.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you have some sort of intermediary states, like New Mexico. New Mexico can swing a little bit.
Yeah.
Or Vermont, right? And something like that. And of course, Bernie was a Democrat, but, as we've said, he was very non-established.
Yeah, well, he actually, he was an independent. I mean,
he's listed in Congress.
He is
I mean,
independent.
his policies are not independent, but...
And see, he ran on the Democratic ticket because he knew that was his only shot.
Yes.
He knew if he tried to go independent, tried to go Green Party, tried to go whatever, no one would have even known who he was.
Yeah.
He would have never become a thing. There would have never been the whole field of burn had he done that.
And I feel, this goes both ways for both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. They raised issues that are frankly probably the reason why we're even having this show. Yeah. I mean, you look at the two of them. Without them, since when have 16 and 15-year-olds, 17-year-olds been interested in what's going on in their nation? Because the old sentiment is, I can't vote. What is it going to have on me? And you look at these so diametrically opposed people, and the way they've been able to bring people together, to have a discussion is just within itself something that we need to take away from this election.
Yeah, I mean, and even if you have like two, unpopular candidates, but just to go back to, we were talking about third parties, just to go back to the James Stockdale quote, who am I? Why am I here? And that's, I think, the big problem for a lot of third-party candidates. Nobody knows who they are.
Exactly.
I mean, nobody, who knows? I didn't know who, like, half the candidates on the ballot were until, like, the day before the election.
Exactly.
So I think there's an exposure issue there with that has to be addressed, whether it's the campaign finance reform or just those parties getting more money.
I mean, and this is stuff we got a lot into in the last episode. I mean, absolutely check that out if you have not already. But we talk a lot about educating people politically, not only about like third parties and things that most people wouldn't really get into, but also a lot about how to get younger people into it. And they say, back in the day, if you're talking like post World War II, and then into the 50s and 60s and even 70s, kids were more interested in politics. I mean, and if you think about it, they had a reason to be. You take the 50s and the 60s, we're talking the height of the Cold War. There was a big American threat. America didn't pretend to be, this governor of the world in charge of everything like we kind of pretend to now, because we don't have a huge imminent threat in front of our face like we used to. People were genuinely scared during the Cold War. And so it caused them to get interested into politics because they wanted to make sure they stayed safe. Then you go into the 60s and 70s. You had the Vietnam War. Well, obviously kids were getting into politics because by the time they were 18, they were probably getting drafted.
Yeah.
But now there's nothing that really threatens a kid, and not to say that it's good to have a threat lingering above us.
I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. I think there's plenty of fear within this new enemy that we have in the United States. You look at the Cold War, you look at the end of World War II, and who were you fighting? You were fighting an enemy, and you knew who that opponent was because he wore a uniform and he represented a blaring ideology. And nowadays, it's like in the shadows. These terrorist groups, and I think there is a fear among the youth.
I think there is too, and I'm not saying there's not, and I'm not saying that we have no reason to fear. Again, I'm also not saying that a fear is a good thing per se. I feel the sentiment isn't the same. I mean, you talk back, I guess, which is true, and this is a fair comparison you could make, is back in the 50s they had nuclear attack drills. Where all the kids would go and get under their desk, as if that would help them from a nuclear explosion. But they'd do it just to pretend to feel safe. And nowadays, pretty much every school in the country does have lockdown drills for mass shooting events, which is absolutely something that did not used to happen. It is a new thing we need to do. Yeah. So I think in that regard there's a fear, but I think it's not appreciated enough.
It doesn't have that nationalistic.
Exactly.
Pride.
Like there isn't
the pride like we're gonna defeat the enemy and we're gonna find a way, and I'm gonna look forward to it one day because I'm gonna be an adult and I'm gonna be proud and I'm gonna find a way. I'm gonna be better than some other person that's putting fear into my family.
Right. And there's not. That's totally true. And we're talking before about the loss of American pride and American nationalism. But there's a big lack of that, in terms of this fear. So if there is a fear, and I will agree that there is one, it's not seen in the same light, I think, as part of the problem. And so again, not to say that necessarily that we need more fear in our lives, but I think if we're talking over the next 4 years, because kind of where we're going, next 4 years in this country, I would hope that our government can do a better job of capitalizing on that. To making sure that people really do come to appreciate what it is to be an American, and not to stand up there and to pretend that we have the biggest stick in the park.
Yeah.
To be humble about it and say, look, there are threats out there, and I'm not going to stand up here and tell you, pretending, look, everything's going to be all right, we have the situation totally under control. There's a point where you need to admit we don't.
Yeah.
And I think that's important, because that will get people to go, you're right, we don't.
I mean, you look at Gerald Ford.
I want to stand behind my country.
Yeah.
Gerald Ford had to make an address like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, I mean, things changed after the Ford administration. I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to the old Teddy Roosevelt quote. Speak softly and carry a big stick.
Keep softly.
Right. We have a big stick, but we don't need to broadcast that to everybody.
Exactly.
We need but we do need a sense of pride. We do need a sense of, America and all that great stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think
stuff to get behind our country.
Yeah.
And I think that's the number one thing slowing us down too, is that there's so much opposition to what's. And again, I'm a huge fan of protest in the sense that I think it's great for people to go out to voice their opinion, to if they see something wrong in their government, to try to get it changed.
Yeah.
I think that's great. But there's also a point, too, where it becomes too counterproductive. It slows things down too much.
Yeah.
And
Right, and as you said, what you covered, with last week and educating people about politics in their country, a lot of people are just protesting for the sake of protesting.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Well, it's like there's a segment. It's like Waters World on Fox where he'll go, what are the countries in the? We'll talk about the Muslim ban because it's such a. Well, I'll just talk about it for the sake of this.
Sure, yeah, go.
What are the countries in the Muslim ban? Lebanon, strike 1. Egypt, strike 2. Arab Emirates, strike 3. They can't name a country. Like, I understand protesting that, and I understand disagreeing with it, but know what you're talking about.
Exactly.
Like, please.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
If you're going to disagree with something, you have to know what it is first. You have to know
Yeah.
what it is you're disagreeing
And you need
with.
to understand the consequences, too, because that's just as important.
Oh,
Because
absolutely.
where's it going to take the country 10, 15 years from now? You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
and, I mean, yeah, and then you start getting into further than that. Not where are we in 4 years, but that's, where are we further down the line? You protest something now, or even if you support something now, you got to think about not only short-term consequences, but you got to think about the long-term.
Yeah.
That's probably a good way then to sort of segue into the next bit. We'll talk long-term, and then this is not so much just of the country per se, but if we're talking the world, where do you see this world in a few decades?
That is a good question. The last 20, 30 years or so, like since the Cold War, we headed towards kind of a globalistic, everybody together, not necessarily like singing Kumbaya or anything like that, but you know what I mean. Like since the Cold War,
if you look back further, if you look back towards, let's just say the year 1000.
Yeah.
Right, and you just look since then, everything has slowly been progressing. First, you had these large states where things were ruled by a king and whatnot, and it was a feudal system. And slowly everything started nationalizing and nationalizing, and then eventually you hit a point, right around the early 1900s, where you had basically all of Europe had pretty much nationalized in some form or another. You had most of the Americas. War.
Yeah.
World War I, World War II,
Yeah.
and that came as a result of the nationalism. But we got over it,
Yeah.
and it seems like we've been progressing now further nationalism, and then, again, right about after World War II, we started saying, well, this isn't good enough anymore. This is basically what we had in the feudal system with smaller states fighting each other within this big, quote-unquote nation. That's what we have now, but on
Yeah.
a bigger scale, a more dangerous scale. So now, as you said, we've been globalized.
Yes.
So now the countries are trying to come closer and closer together.
Yeah.
You have things like NATO and things like the
Uh-huh.
United Nations, or even
Yeah.
stuff like free trade agreements.
The NAFTA.
Yeah, right. Like NAFTA. There you
NAFTA,
go.
TPP, same thing.
trying to bring areas together. And I'm not necessarily saying
And
that NAFTA's a brilliant idea. That's not really what I'm saying. But I'm saying we have been globalizing. So where do you think this is leading? Do you think
Honest,
we're gonna-
I'm not exactly sure.
Do you
to
think
be honest
we're going to
with
be
you.
singing Kumbaya
Well,
down
we
the
might,
line?
we might be. I mean, I'm open to that. I mean,
I'd
that
hope so,
sounds
yeah.
good. But I think America's going to dictate a lot of it. I'm not exactly sure where it's going. I don't know where this administration wants to take it, but America is going to dictate a lot of where we're going to be in the world in 4 years, where we're going to be in 8 years, where we're going to be in 20 years, because America has always kind of been the leader at the forefront of, say, globalization or the
Right.
Cold War or something like that. So
Right.
I think other countries are going to follow America's lead. I just don't know where that's going yet. I think we need a little more time. I mean, we could probably come back in 6 months and be able to more definitively say, where's this going? I think, Connor, you had a thought. I cut you off. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, I'm just wanting to point out back to this whole negative connotation towards the term nationalism. I think in the root of nationalism, it's a belief in the greater nation that you live in as a whole, and that's not saying that you're better than another group of people. And there's still plenty possibilities for unifications between nations and things like that. But I think that nationalism needs to exist in its purest meaning. In order for globalization to actually occur, there needs
I'll
to
agree with you 100%. I mean, as we were saying before, we need a greater sense of national pride in this country.
Well, I think of it like all the countries get together. It's like a party, right? And everybody kind of gets together. But what good are you going to do other countries if you're nervous, if you're sitting in the corner, if you're not proud, if you're not,
Right, if you're not
standing
proud
up
of who you are.
straight, if you're not,
But then
walking
to be fair,
around like you're confident, you know what I mean?
To be fair, though, then at the same time, you hit the issue of you don't want to be the person trying to get all the attention of the party.
Oh, absolutely.
Because then no one wants to talk to you.
Yeah,
So I think there's a good balance. I think we need more of it in
Yeah.
this country. But, I mean, if you do have too much nationalism, then we're talking Germany 1939.
Yeah.
I mean, that's...
Yeah.
When people talk about the reasons for World War I and World War II, they use what's the acronym? Maine, I think, is the acronym.
that sounds right.
And then the N is nationalism, and that's probably the biggest piece of it, is that people were just had so much pride, had so much want in their country, that it led them to have disregard for other countries. And I think we need to grow pride for ourselves while growing respect for the other nations.
Yeah.
Is what I would say. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do agree. We do need more nationalism. Yeah.
Right. And you look at certain parts of the world and the utter disregard that we have for other people. I've watched a lot of documentaries, and basically we're on a level playing field as a world. You can't just look down at other, countries due to their ethnicity, their size, their geographic location, and state that you're better than someone. I think that's part of what, in international affairs, that's one of our deepest issues. This idea that you're superior to someone, and that someone else has to support you due to your inferiority is something that's another issue in global affairs. And I think that's something that actually Donald Trump has pointed out, that there are certain problems that we have to deal with, but the United States should not be the one taking care of certain countries due to the fact that they are looked down upon by other world powers.
Yeah, and that's like when he always says America first, and everybody kind of flips out. But it's like, all that really means when he says that is, we're going to take care of our people, we're going to take care of our problems, and we'll deal with the rest of the world later. Now, I mean, you could think whatever you want of that policy, but that's really what America first, when you think about it, is. And that's what kind of, that's what his platform is, like you were saying. It's just we need to take care of us before we can take care of everybody else.
Absolutely. And I definitely think that a big misconception about that saying is America first. And you go, oh, what, because we're better than everyone else? That's what people will say. Oh, you think we're better than everyone else? And no, in fact, I think that saying actually means quite the contrary. I think what it's admitting at that point is, no, we're America, and we too have problems.
Yes.
We have as big of problems as everybody else in the world, if not bigger problems than anybody else in the world.
Yeah.
But if you've ever been on a plane, I assume both of you have taken a plane.
Oh, yeah.
At least once in your life. They'll always tell you, whenever they talk about the thing with the oxygen mask, is they always tell you, before you go to help anyone else, you got to help yourself.
Yes.
You need to help yourself. Always do your own mask before you do your infants or your child's or the elderly woman next to you. You need to do yours first. Because if you pass out in the middle of putting hers on, then you're both out of luck. I mean, so you need to help yourself first. And I think that's what that saying is addressing. It's not, look, we're better than everyone else, so we're only worrying about our problems. It's, no, we have problems just the same as they do.
Yes, if not worse.
But we need to work on fixing ours first before we can get to any of yours.
Yeah, I mean, what Trump, I think, is doing is basically taking the United States to, like, Dr. Drew celebrity rehab, where he's just saying they need to get away, we need help. And when he says America first, again, it is not necessarily a statement of American superiority. He's just saying, look, we're messed up right now. We need help, kind of like, addicts and alcoholics and all that stuff. So I think he's just what he's saying is just, let's focus on the United States. I mean, his message is very simple, but that's what he's trying to convey, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you guys basically have covered everything I wanted to discuss in this issue.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of a good way to move on to our next topic, which is a little different. The future of travel in space. This has been an issue that's been contested for a number of years.
I'll just say this first. Before necessarily we get to that, because we're talking about the future of the world, do either of you think that we'll get to a point where space travel will become necessary? Finding a new home, getting away from this planet. Basically, do you think we'll ever screw it up so bad? Whether you want to talk in terms of global warming, in terms of environmental hazards, or if you want to talk, because we were talking about possibly growing towards, universal unification in terms of, globalizing. But do you think possibly it might go the other way? Do you think we might get towards a global conflict that could?
You basically, this is part of this issue is the conundrum that is global warming, right? And you look at both sides of the ticket, and certain scientists will say there's a direct link between the emissions that we are making here on Earth and global warming. And then there are certain people that say, well, look at the patterns of the Earth throughout thousands and thousands of years, and this just may be, a heat spike or a change in temperature and things like that. And there is concern that we may have to leave this planet. But, I don't know, I don't know if corrupting what we have is the best course of action, and just abandoning it and saying that we live in this wasteland. If space travel, it can be possible. I mean, there have been studies made, but I think we just have to look at where we live as a whole and try to make the best out of where we are currently.
Yeah, and I mean that's
just trying to fix it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. That's my favorite option.
Yeah.
If you asked me of all the options, which one I wanted to happen, I'm gonna pick that one over any of the other ones. If the options were all ice cream flavors, that one would be my chocolate.
But
I'll put it that way.
I think it's an interesting question because I think we've done a lot to this planet.
Right.
I mean,
right.
we really have. We've put it through the ringer. It hasn't killed us yet. I know that's a simple way of thinking about it, but we've done a lot, and it hasn't killed us. So, whether I don't know how badly we'd have to screw up where, space travel would be our only option. I mean, I think that would be pretty drastic. I don't see it happening in my lifetime, but you can't shut the door on it either, because it's always possible. I mean, this is something that's been talked about before.
Louis C.K. Do either you are you familiar with the comedian Louis
Yes,
C.K.?
yes.
Yeah, he's got a great bit. It's about God. Like, if he were to just kind of come back now to talk to people, and he just saw the condition that we left the earth in. And he comes back, he's like, what the hell, what are you doing? Why are you just spewing shit into the air? What is this? What are you doing? Why are the polar bears brown? What did you do to the polar bear? It's a hilarious bit, and it's great. But I mean, that is, I think, in that regard, whether or not you want to agree with global warming or whatnot, I think something that kind of can be more universally agreed upon is the fact that what we're doing probably isn't good.
It's not the best.
You can't say that we're not harming the world in at least some way by spewing poisonous gas into the air, and we're dumping toxins into the ocean, and nuclear weapons and all the nuclear waste that we have. I'm not saying, again, per se, that we're totally destroying it, but you can't argue that it's good. You can't argue that it's not eventually, if you want to talk hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years from now, but it's not eventually going to kind of go down a destructive path.
Yeah, and one remark I want to make is, even though we've made all these blunders in the oceans and atomic bombs and things like that, we have this current sentiment within the world that this is an issue, and I think that is important, regardless of whether or not you believe in climate change or not. The sentiment that we need to change for the better and preserve this beautiful planet, it is something that it is important, because looking at where we live and frankly what God had created, we want to preserve whatever we have left. And I think that regardless of whether or not you believe in it, you have to say, all right, we're going to stop any possibility of ruining what we have. And I think that's the best course of action.
Yeah, and if I could just make one last point, if we get to the point where it's so drastic that we all gotta, make space travel a legitimate option, we might not be alive. I hate to say that, but that's
if
you know
it comes to that point.
that's a possibility. I mean, if our air is so poisonous, it's like
Right.
China, where we have to wear gas masks,
we have to wear the
surgical
masks.
masks over
Yeah.
our head, over our mouths. So
Let's hope it never gets there.
let's hope it never gets there. But if it does get there,
And I think
we might not be there to see it. Just saying.
I think on that note, if it does get there, I think what we'll do is we'll cut this episode off here, and we're gonna give everybody a chance to think. We're gonna take ourselves, our time before the next one, to look into this a little bit of ourselves. NASA just discovered TRAPPIST-1, exciting stuff. So I think that'll be some cool things to talk about for next time.
Yeah.
If we do decide we need to leave, how do we go about doing it? And so I think that'll be a cool spot to talk about. Again, everybody, feel free to think about it yourselves. If you have anything that you think is a wonderful revelation, go ahead and throw it down in the comments below. But other than that, that'll be this episode. So thank you everybody for watching, and we hope to see you next time on Political Inaccuracy.
I mean, I went on the JSA trip, and there was this group, they wanted to annex the moon.
Can we do an audit on the moon?